Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. So today we're going to be looking at something that I think a lot of people struggle with, and that is how to be less socially awkward,
Yeah.
and particularly for people who are more introverted.
Yeah, definitely.
So um, the source that we're going to be diving deep into today is this really interesting Reddit thread from Rask, and the question was basically like, how to stop being socially awkward as an introvert. And there are tons of different responses, everything from very tactical advice to like mindset shifts to like people debating whether you even need to change at all.
Yeah, it's a really, really interesting thread.
Yeah, and one thing that kept coming up over and over again was this idea of fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
But I know a lot of people hear that and they're kind of like, that sounds kind of phony.
Yeah. I totally understand the hesitation, but there's actually some science behind that approach.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Have you ever heard of neuroplasticity?
I think so. Isn't that like about how the brain can change?
Exactly. It's the brain's ability to rewire itself based on our experiences. So when we consistently put ourselves in social situations, even if they make us uncomfortable, you're actually strengthening the neural pathways associated with social ease.
So it's not about like being someone you're not. It's more about like training your brain to be more comfortable.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
In the Reddit thread, someone was talking about how like bartending, even though they're an introvert,
Yeah.
forced them to be more social, and eventually it just became like second nature.
That's a perfect example of neuroplasticity in action.
So practice is key.
Yeah,
But how do we actually do that?
right.
Like, how do you actually get that practice in a way that's not just like throwing yourself into every single social situation?
Well, one of the things I thought was a really great suggestion in the thread was watch and learn from people who are naturally outgoing.
So just kind of like observe how they interact with people.
Exactly. Pay attention to their body language, how they start conversations, how they keep the energy flowing.
What are some of the specific things that we should be looking for?
Like how they use eye contact to connect, how their body language conveys openness and approachability, how they initiate conversations with genuine curiosity.
Someone in the thread made a really interesting point. They said that by the time you're an adult, if you're an extrovert, you've had like way more practice with social interaction.
Yeah,
It's like you've had a head start.
that's a really fascinating perspective.
Yeah, so it kind of leads into like more active ways to practice this. And people were talking about public speaking classes, even like improv groups.
Both excellent options.
Yeah, totally outside my comfort zone, I think,
Mine too.
but probably a good idea.
Yeah.
But I did see some pushback in the thread about, this idea of like feeling like you're forced to conform instead of just being yourself.
Yeah, that's a valid concern.
But how do you know if you're just putting on a mask or you're actually like becoming more socially skilled?
That's where self-awareness comes in. Reflect on your values, your strengths, the qualities you want to bring to your social interactions. The goal isn't to become someone else entirely. It's to enhance those.
So it's more about like refining your approach than a complete personality makeover.
Exactly.
Yeah. And it's important to remember that like not everyone needs to be like a social butterfly.
Exactly.
There was one commenter who was just like, avoid people.
Yeah,
Short, sweet, to the point.
I love that.
Not always practical, but
True.
it does speak to like, recognizing your own needs and preferences.
Absolutely.
So it sounds like there's not like a one-size-fits-all solution.
Definitely not.
It's about finding what works for you.
Absolutely.
So we have a lot more to cover in this deep dive. We'll be right back after a quick break.
Sounds good. Welcome back to our deep dive on how to navigate social situations when you're more of an introvert.
So we were talking about like faking it till you make it and rewiring our brains through practice.
Mm-hmm.
But before we get into some of those tips, I want to go back to something that came up in that Reddit thread, which was this idea of like being introverted is like a problem to be solved.
Yeah, it's almost like society has this expectation that we should all be outgoing and constantly seeking the spotlight.
Right, like there's something wrong with being more reserved.
Exactly. And it's really not about that at all. Introversion and extroversion are just different ways of being. Neither is inherently better or worse.
It reminds me of that saying, like, the quiet ones are often the ones with the loudest minds.
Yes, exactly.
So it's about like understanding and appreciating those differences, right?
Absolutely. Introverts often find, deep, meaningful conversations more rewarding than, surface level chit chat. And they recharge their energy through solitude, whereas extroverts gain energy from being around people.
So how can introverts kind of leverage those strengths to navigate social situations more effectively?
Well, one of the things that came up a lot in the thread was the power of asking questions.
Yeah.
And it's not about just, rattling off a list of questions. It's about like sparking genuine conversation.
But what if your mind goes blank and you can't think of anything to say?
Yeah, that happens to all of us, but one thing that can be really helpful is to be present and actually listen to what the other person is saying, because oftentimes they will drop little hints or cues that you can pick up on.
So, like, if they mention that they went on a recent trip, ask them about it.
Exactly, or if they're wearing a band t-shirt, ask them about their musical tastes.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and don't be afraid to share a little bit about yourself too.
Yeah.
Reciprocity is key in building rapport.
So we talked about the conversation piece. So what about body language?
Oh, body language is huge. It can communicate even more than our words sometimes.
So even if you're like nervous on the inside, you can still project confidence through your posture.
Exactly. Try to stand tall, make eye contact, and cross your arms. These simple adjustments can make you appear more open and approachable.
Yeah, it's like sending these nonverbal cues that you're engaged.
Exactly. And remember, body language is a two-way street. Pay attention to the other person's cues. Are they leaning in? Are they making eye contact? Are they smiling?
And if they're not, if they're like looking at their phone or fidgeting, maybe that's your cue to kind of wrap things up.
Exactly.
Okay, so one last thing that I want to touch on is social anxiety.
Yeah.
I know that that's something that a lot of introverts struggle with.
It's incredibly common, and there's absolutely no shame in experiencing it.
So, we were talking earlier about that advice from the Reddit thread to exhale all your anxiety outwards,
Right.
which I love. But how do we actually do that?
But even though that phrase might sound a little bit out there, it actually hints at a really powerful tool, which is mindful breathing techniques.
Okay, so can you give us an example?
Sure. So when you feel those anxious thoughts taking over, just pause for a moment and take a few slow, deep breaths and really focus on the sensation of your breath entering and leaving your body. You might even want to count your breaths. Inhale for a count of 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4.
This is like intentionally shifting your focus away from the anxiety and onto something that you can control.
Exactly. And it sounds simple, but it can be incredibly effective in calming your nervous system and bringing you back to the present moment.
So what if you're in the middle of a conversation and those anxious thoughts start creeping in? Can you just like stop and start doing breathing exercises?
It's not always practical to stop and do a full breathing exercise in the middle of a social interaction, but even just taking a moment to notice your breath can be really helpful. A few deep breaths can really help ground you and regain your composure.
Yeah. And it's sometimes just acknowledging those feelings can actually take some of their power away.
Absolutely.
And if you find that social anxiety is like consistently impacting your life,
Yeah.
don't hesitate to reach out to a therapist, a professional.
Yes.
They can teach you some coping mechanisms and techniques to manage that anxiety.
Absolutely.
So that Reddit thread had some other great advice for kind of navigating those day-to-day interactions. Things like starting small with simple things like greetings or compliments.
Yes, those small gestures can go a long way in making you feel more comfortable and kind of building your confidence. It's like practicing your social skills in a low-pressure environment.
And then the other one that I loved was embrace the possibility of messing up.
Yes, nobody is perfect.
It's bound to happen, right?
Exactly. And instead of dwelling on those moments, try to laugh them off and learn from them. Nobody's perfect, and those little stumbles are often what make us relatable.
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, what is the one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that navigating social situations as an introvert is a journey, not a destination. It's about experimenting with different approaches, finding what works best for you and celebrating the small victories along the way.
Yeah, progress, not perfection.
Exactly.
And remember, it's okay to be yourself.
Absolutely. Don't try to force yourself into a mold that doesn't feel authentic. Embrace your unique strengths and find ways to connect with others in a way that feels genuine and energizing.
We've explored so many helpful insights today, and I hope this deep dive has given our listeners some new tools and perspectives to navigate social situations with more confidence and ease. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and we'll see you next time on the Deep Dive. All right, so welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're continuing our conversation about how to navigate social situations as an introvert. Now, I kind of want to get into the nitty-gritty, like what are some practical things that we can do during those interactions to feel more at ease?
Yeah, for sure. Well, we've talked about the power of asking questions, but let's explore that a little bit further. Remember, it's not just about rattling off a list of questions. It's about sparking genuine conversation.
Right. But sometimes I feel like my mind goes blank and I can't think of anything to ask.
I totally get it. That happens to all of us. One helpful technique is to just be present and actively listen to what the other person is saying, because oftentimes they'll drop little hints or cues that you can pick up on.
Okay, so like, what do you mean?
Well, let's say they mention a recent trip, you can ask them about it. Or if they're wearing a band t-shirt, ask about their musical taste.
Ooh, that's a good one. Yeah, it's like using those details as like springboards for conversation.
Exactly, and don't be afraid to share a bit about yourself too.
Mhm.
Reciprocity is key, you know?
Right. Okay, so we've got the conversation piece. What about body language? I know that can be a big factor in how we're perceived.
Body language is huge. It can often communicate even more than our words sometimes.
Okay.
So even if you're feeling nervous inside, projecting confidence through your posture can make a world of difference.
Easier said than done, though, when you've got those butterflies in your stomach.
I know, but try to stand tall, make eye contact, uncross your arms. These simple adjustments can really make you appear more open and approachable.
Yeah, it's like you're sending those silent signals that you're engaged and ready to connect.
Exactly. And remember, body language is a two-way street, so pay attention to the other person's cues as well. Are they leaning in? Are they making eye contact? Are they smiling?
Right. And if they're not, if they're like, looking at their phone or fidgeting, maybe that's your cue to kind of like wrap things up.
Exactly. Reading those signals can really help you navigate the interaction more smoothly.
Okay, one last thing that I think we need to talk about is social anxiety.
Yeah.
I know this is something that a lot of introverts struggle with, and it can make those social situations feel even more daunting.
Absolutely. Social anxiety is incredibly common. There's no shame in experiencing it.
So we were talking earlier about that advice from the Reddit thread, to exhale all your anxiety outwards.
Oh, yeah, I love that one.
But like, how do we actually do that?
Well, even though that phrase might sound a little bit out there, it hints at a really powerful tool, which is mindful breathing techniques.
Yeah, so can you break that down for us a little bit?
Sure. So when you feel those anxious thoughts taking over, just pause for a moment and take a few slow, deep breaths and really focus on the sensation of your breath entering and leaving your body. You can even count your breaths if that helps. Inhale for a count of 4, hold for 4, exhale for 4.
So you're basically intentionally shifting your focus away from that anxiety and onto something that you can control, like your breath.
Exactly. And it sounds so simple, but it can be incredibly effective in calming your nervous system and bringing you back to the present moment.
Now, what if you're like in the middle of a conversation and you start to feel those anxious thoughts creep in? You can't exactly like stop and start doing breathing exercises.
Yeah, you're right. It's not always practical to stop and do a full breathing exercise in the middle of a social interaction, but even just taking a moment to notice your breath can be really helpful. Just a few deep breaths can really help ground you and regain your composure.
Yeah, and sometimes just acknowledging those feelings, just saying to yourself, hey, I'm feeling a little anxious right now, can actually take some of their power away.
Absolutely. And remember, if you find that social anxiety is consistently impacting your life, don't hesitate to reach out for professional help.
Right.
A therapist can teach you coping mechanisms and techniques to manage that anxiety more effectively.
Yeah, it's all about self-care and prioritizing your mental well-being.
Absolutely.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into how to navigate social situations as an introvert, what is the one key takeaway that you hope our listeners will remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this is a journey, not a destination. It's about experimenting with different approaches, finding what works best for you, and celebrating those small victories along the way.
It's about progress, not perfection.
Yeah, exactly. And remember, it's okay to be yourself.
Absolutely. Don't try to force yourself into a mold that doesn't feel authentic. Embrace your unique strengths and find ways to connect with others in a way that feels genuine and energizing.
We've explored so many helpful insights today, and I really hope this deep dive has given our listeners some new tools and perspectives to navigate social situations with more confidence and ease. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.